All right, welcome everyone. If you want to join us, turn on your video so we know that you're here. We're going to go around and greet people. Give it a minute or so for as people are entering in. Thanks for being here today and fitting us into your Halloween. I don't see anyone in costumes. I thought for sure our presenters would wear a mask of some sort.
Well, as soon as this is over, I'm going to start carving pumpkins for tonight.
Good. Good. Raj, are we at about what we thought in terms of participation? Should we get started?
Yes.
All right, great. Well, welcome everyone. I'm Melissa Scanlon. I'm a professor here at the School of Freshwater Sciences and the director of the Center for Water Policy. Thanks for joining us today. We're really excited to gather together the network across the UW system to talk about wetlands and the post-Sackett era. And I'm excited to have our guests here talking about the mapping project that they've done. I was really intrigued by the maps that Greenfire and the Nature Conservancy did to show the impact of the Trump era waters of the United States rule back in 2020. And when I heard that they were updating their maps to show the impact of Sackett, and they were seeking input on them and connecting with UW system academics and others, researchers, I thought this would be a great opportunity to try to connect up and hear from them directly on their methods and see if we have any input for them and how people can help. So we'll have a presentation from Tom and Mike on the maps, and then there'll be plenty of time for people to ask questions and talk amongst each other to engage with them. So I'm going to turn it over to Raj, who is helping us here at the Center for Water Policy, and she is leading the network this year. So Raj, you can take it away.
Thank you, Melissa. Welcome everyone, and thank you again for joining us this afternoon. Definitely appreciate it. I will be introducing our speakers for today, Michael Cain and Tom Bernthal. So Michael Cain is the co-chair of the Public Trust Wetlands Working Group for the Wisconsin Greenfire. He was the lead attorney for the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources in their wetland and surface water regulatory program for 34 years. There, he was involved in drafting and developing laws and regulations protecting Wisconsin's waters under the public trust doctrine, and was a lead attorney for enforcement and litigation of these programs. Michael continues to work on issues relating to Wisconsin's water policies and its evolving land water ethic. So Tom Bernthal is also a Greenfire member and a member of its Public Trust and Wetlands Work Group. He retired from the Wisconsin DNR, where he served as the Wetland Monitoring and Assessment Coordinator. He is a wetland ecologist. So I will turn it over to Michael first. I'm going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see this. All right.
Yes, that works, Raj. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to participate in this. I started at the Department of Natural Resources as a law clerk in the 1970s after graduating from UW-Stevens Point in biology. And I started working on these issues actually in 1975 as a law clerk. And as any of you who have listened to Melissa's presentations or other presentations, this is a long history of working on these waters of the U.S. issues. Next slide. Just a brief introduction to Wisconsin Greenfire. We have over 800 members. We have 250 professional members, who are lawyers, scientists, engineers, geologists, etc. And we were formed to try to advance science-informed analysis and policy solutions, and are working both in the state of Wisconsin legislature and some national issues. And we hope to bring scientific information to decision making and formulation of public policy. And for those of you who don't know us, we do have a science council, and I know that you all have a lot on your plates, but feel free to join us. We would welcome you to Wisconsin Green Fire going forward. Next slide. I know Melissa Raj provided a background program that Melissa and others had put on, which went into a fair amount of detail on Sackett versus EPA. So if you don't have background on that, I'd urge you to look at Melissa's presentation. And that, the Sackett versus EPA is a U.S. Supreme Court decision that was decided in May of 2023. Remove protection under the Clean Water Act for most wetlands and ephemeral streams in the United States. The federal government has said that they think 63% of wetlands are removed from federal protection. The maps that we're developing and we're continuing to work on, which aren't final, we think in the upper Midwest, it's as much as 88% of wetlands that have been removed from protection. And that potentially has a large impact. Next slide. The definition of waters in the U.S. was contained in the 1972 Clean Water Act, and it's been consistently interpreted by the federal courts since 1975. There was a case, NRDC versus Callaway. The Corps of Engineers tried to limit the scope of the Clean Water Act to traditional navigable waters. And in the 1975 decision, the DC Circuit Court said that no, it's broader than that. And so these are the issues that people have been dealing with since that time. The Sackett decision, in disregard of precedent and without any scientific basis, reversed 45 years of consistent federal program administration through 8 presidential administrations protecting adjacent wetlands under the Clean Water Act. And Justice Kavanaugh, who's a conservative justice, in his opinion, noted that they were reversing 45 years of consistent federal program administration. So there are a lot of people who recognize that this was a major change in the direction and scope of the Clean Water Act. Next slide. Most states do not have residual wetland protection laws. We do in Wisconsin. This is a map that was put together by James McElfish of the Environmental Law Institute out of DC. As you can see from this map, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, and so the states in the Northeast and states on the West Coast have some fairly substantial background laws that continue to protect wetlands. But if you look at the green states, they were reliant on WOTUS. The pothole regions of the Dakotas, most of the central part of the U.S., there are virtually no background wetland protections in the state. The Environmental Law Institute has a lot of information on this. I have not looked at other states, but I think that if 62 to 88% of wetlands have been removed from federal jurisdiction, and if there are no background protections, you can see what the potential impacts are from the standpoint of water quality, habitat, and flooding. Next slide. Wisconsin historically has had robust wetland protection laws. During the 1980s, when the Corps of Engineers was trying to issue broad, nationwide permits, we denied certification for that. And so, the history of Wisconsin law is beyond the scope of today's discussion, but there will be some erosion of protections in Wisconsin due to the Sackett decision. And as I indicated earlier, the loss of wetlands nationally and in Wisconsin is going to affect water quality, public safety due to flooding, et cetera, and fish and wildlife. Next slide. We're here today because we are working to assess and map the impacts of the Sackett decision. Tom and our experts have been working on this. We are working through the Nature Conservancy to be sure that we understand what the federal government did. Nick Miller, who's part of the group, has worked on this recently, got some contacts inside EPA who are interested in our work. We're going to be talking to them to make sure that, that we are interpreting consistently what the Sackett decision means. From my perspective, I think this information will hopefully inform future public policy discussions, around on both the state and national level. And while the maps that we're doing are focusing on Wisconsin, my understanding, and Tom can talk about this a little more, is that we will be able to apply these methodologies to other states if they have sufficient underlying data, which I think will be useful going forward. Next slide. And so thank you again for inviting us from Greenfire, and I'll turn it over to Tom Bernthal.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. So a little background on me. My work at DNR related to mapping, monitoring, and assessing the functions of wetlands, and lots of different the water quality standards that Mike referred to that Wisconsin has actually protect wetland functional values. And so my career has been in assessing what these what level different wetlands are providing these, what I'm now calling public benefits. And so the loss of protection of wetlands, I think of it in terms of kind of a risk analysis of what public benefits are potentially vulnerable. I think that's a good way to characterize it. So next slide. So despite its unobtrusive appearance, this is the money slide. So what this shows is the numbers. So in Wisconsin, we've been improving when I started my career, we thought we had 5.3 million acres of wetlands in Wisconsin. Now because we've gotten better at mapping wetlands, we actually have 6.4 acres mapped of wetland. What we did with our mapping project, this is the bottom line. I'm going to give that to you up front and then go back into the methods of how we got to this. Am I producing an echo, or can you hear me okay?
We can hear you okay.
It's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I just heard an echo, but hopefully you're not. So the bottom line is of the 6.4 million acres of wetlands in Wisconsin, when we took the Sackett decision and took the terms virtually indistinguishable from associated navigable water and permanently connected, the two aspects of the Sackett decision, and we took them at their word and just translated that, the mapping data that we have available characterizes wetlands to the extent that we can measure these things. So 88% of the wetlands in Wisconsin would not be under Clean Water Act jurisdiction, according to a simple interpretation of the words in the decision. So the key words are virtually indistinguishable. So having to be covered with the same water that the navigable water has, and permanently connected. So if that water connection at any time of the year is not, if the wetland dries down seasonally at all, it's not protected. And those are the two key things that affect why there's such a large amount of wetlands that are going to be left unprotected. So, and then the other part of this slide is this public benefits, and that relates to a project that Joanne and Nick and I and others did back in the 2016 to 2019 era. And we did a functional analysis using map level data. And I'll go into it later as to how we did that, that assessed the functions of every wetland in the state using map data. So not going out in the field and doing this, but using just the data that's available through our mapping. And so of the wetlands that are no longer protected by the Clean Water Act, according to our estimate, in this project where we assessed wetland function, 69% or 4.4 million acres were wetlands that we rated as either very high or high for the flood abatement function. And then likewise, 3.7 million acres or 58% were rated high or very high for retaining sediment and phosphorus. And then 78% of the no longer protected wetlands provide the public benefit of supporting fish and aquatic life. So next slide. So this shows you what that actually looks like on the landscape across at a statewide level. So the aqua color are wetlands that are still protected, and the tan color is wetlands that are no longer protected by the Clean Water Act. So the most obvious Horicon Marsh is the largest aqua thing that you see there north of Madison and Milwaukee. And then you can see some aqua in the Necedah area. But if you look at the northern Wisconsin, especially the forested wetlands, they're totally left unprotected by this decision. So I'm going to give you some examples, local examples. So then the other type of system that is still has some wetlands that are still regulatory are shallow lake systems. And think of the shallow water zone of a lake that has aquatic bed or emergent vegetation, big stands of cattails or big stands of bulrushes, or aquatic bed pond lilies, that sort of thing. So this is the west end of Lake Puckaway, and here you'll see some L's, which just stands for lake or lacustrine. And that's where, if it's virtually indistinguishable from the navigable water, we'll protect it. But those bodies of water are already protected, and it's kind of disingenuous to call that protected as a wetland, because it's a wetland and a lake water at the same time. The other thing you'll see is the emergent vegetation. So there's polygon with an H and a BI. That's a large one that would still be regulated. And the BI stands for bidirectional flow path. And that is where the water level in the wetland moves up and down with the water level in the lake. But again, you'll see Ks that are pulled out, and then Hs that have this intermittent connection that are pulled out. So then the next one is the lower Wisconsin Riverway. And here you've got this large river channel with all these islands in it. And most of those islands are K hydrologic modifiers because they dry down in between high water levels, but they're wetlands year round nonetheless. And so in the river system, it's really only the channels that are protected. Again, the virtually indistinguishable means if you can separate out something as a wetland, but not part of the river, we're not going to protect it, according to Sackett. Okay, so we'll move on to the next slide. So the whole bit of functional analysis came from this big Wetlands by Design project. And to me, the power of this mapping is not just that, yeah, we're losing a lot of wetlands from protection, but we're losing public benefits that these wetlands are providing. And that's the piece of research that I would love to pass on to other interested researchers. So this project we've documented with a final report. If you go to Wetlands by Design on your Google searcher, you'll come up to the Nature Conservancy site and you'll be able to click on the final report that actually has the details of our methods, and it's quite a lot of detail. But this project was joint with the Nature Conservancy and the DNR, and the data is being maintained by the Nature Conservancy. If you're interested in accessing it, you can contact me, and I'll probably put you in touch with Joanne Klein and or John Wagner from the Nature Conservancy. So next slide. Okay, I think, yeah, there you go. It's clicking on. The middle part of this slide is what I wanted to point to. This landscape position, landform, water body type, water flow path. This is what enables us to get a start at assessing the ecosystem services or the functions or the public benefits, however you want to phrase it, aspect of what we're risking here. So it was the water flow path, that was those modifiers that were the CI for connection intermittent or the TH for through flow. In this project, every wetland that's mapped gets assigned a landscape position, a landform, a water body type, and a water flow path. And it was the water flow path that was particularly important in analyzing the NWAPR 2020 rule. And now it's the wetland location, the water regime from that first list of wetland map data. So I'll just jump ahead to say that nationwide, if somebody wanted to do this kind of analysis on a national basis, you'd be using the National Wetland Inventory maps, and they do have water regime data that could be used as a way to estimate the impact. But I'll go into a little bit more about how we did the functional analysis, and then I'll try to finish here. So I've talked about these different water flow paths. Here's a little sketch. This whole system, LLWW, came from Ralph Tyner, who was the longtime coordinator of the National Wetland Inventory, and his initial was to be able to assess functions of wetlands. And so he thought when we're mapping wetlands, we can talk about what landscape position they're in. Lower stream and river terrene means a wetland that is surrounded by upland. But so up in the top corner there, you've got a terrene wetland.
Tom, we're losing you a little bit. Tom,
Can you hear me now?
can you speak again? You might have to stop sharing your camera to see if that'll help. Did we lose him?
I think he might have dropped. Oh, there, he's back without his camera. So maybe, Tom, you need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Okay.
It's
So
a
when
little-
did I cut it out?
It was going in and out when you first started talking about the graphic.
Oh, wow. We'll just have to cover it in questions. So the point of this, relating back to wetlands by design, was I don't have a slide for the next level of analysis that we did, which was what we called the GIS rapid assessment method, where we asked questions that could be answered with the available GIS data in order to assess these functions. So I'm going to give you one example of flood abatement. You might as well go to the next slide. I think that's our flood abatement slide. Yeah. But so, for example, to assess whether a wetland is very high, moderate, or not applicable for the flood abatement function, we asked questions like, is it connected to the stream system? And it had to be connected. Does it have steep slopes draining to the wetland? Does the catchment that it's in have a high runoff potential? Is there dense and persistent vegetation in the wetland? Is the wetland in a floodplain setting? Is the catchment to the wetland ratio a large ratio? So you get the picture. All of these things that we could do in a GIS environment to get at whether that particular wetland polygon, and so that's the spaghetti-like nature of this, means that we're assessing these individual polygons for the flood abatement function. So one of the things I think that can be done going forward to look at the impact is to take the wetlands that we've identified as very high and look at whether they are protected under Sackett or not. And that's what this local map shows. So in the Milwaukee River Basin in the North Branch watershed that you can see there, those tan wetlands are the wetlands that are no longer protected. And so my message to the wetland conservation community is these are the wetlands that are at risk. If you are the Milwaukee Metropolitan Sewerage District and you're charged with flood control, you need to know, which wetlands are going to be most valuable to purchase or get easements on, and you also need to know which ones are, no longer likely to be protected by regulation. So I think I'm kind of out of my allotted time, and apologize for the in and out of the audio. I think I've covered pretty much everything I wanted to cover, so I'll end there and put it out for questions.
All right, that was great. Thank you. Could everyone join me in giving a round of applause to Tom and Mike? So at this point, I'll ask folks who are comfortable turning on their camera and we can open it up to a discussion.
One thing I'd like to add before we start the discussion is, Nick Miller, who's part of the group who's been working on this, has just recently got some contacts in EPA, and so they're going to be working closely with EPA to make sure that we are interpreting the Sackett decision the way the Corps of Engineers and the EPA are interpreting it, which I think is critical going forward. And one other thing I'd mention is, as after the decision came down, I talked to a person who recently retired from the Corps of Engineers who was involved in training Corps personnel around the country in wetland delineation. And he was also involved with Dr. Don Reed, who's no longer with us, unfortunately, from SewerPAC, and developing some of the the field manuals for the Corps of Engineers. And his initial reaction, without looking and talking to our group, was that in the upper Midwest, there was 87% plus of the wetlands that would lose coverage. So he had come to that determination independently. So I think that we have, obviously this needs more work, but I think we have a fair degree of certainty that we're in the ballpark. I don't know, Tom, if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah. No, it's the decision is one of the things in legal questions, Mike, your whole career thinks this has been batted back and forth. Jurisdiction has been expanded and drawn back, and it's always been difficult to come up with a simplistic way that would be easily enforceable or administered. And this decision is definitely simplistic. It's astonishingly ignorant, but it is simplistic. And like I said, when we were analyzing the Trump era rule, we had a lot of question marks about how to treat these different landscape settings and flow paths. And with the Sackett decision, it's actually quite straightforward. But it's like the Dobbs decision, totally undercuts 50 years of precedent.
Well, thanks for providing that context. One of the things I was going to ask about is when the Corps makes a jurisdictional decision, are they going to use the same data that you access to make these maps? And it sounds like you may not know the answer to that yet, but you're going to be learning about that.
Yeah. I mean, when we were looking at the NWOP, I talked to a person from the Corps, and basically they're able to use the same type of map data. They wouldn't necessarily do exactly the same steps that we did. What we did was for the purposes of coming up with an estimate. What they do when they're making an actual jurisdictional determination on a wetland on the land, they're looking at it in much finer focus than we are, and they have the ability to go out in the field. So one of the caveats with our approach is that it's map data, and maps are always wrong.
Is it their practice to go out in the field every time a jurisdictional determination is requested?
If they need to, if the answer is obvious without doing that, then they have discretion as to how much office versus field review to do. So a lot of this is up in the air. But what we did was we just took the decision as it was written and believed the words. And this is this is what it looks like if you believe those words.
All right, thanks. Well, what kind of questions or comments do people have? Feel free to either post in the chat if you just want to write it out, or raise your hand, and Raj will do some making sure people aren't talking over each other.
I also have a couple queued up that we could go through while people are thinking of the questions. Ron, I just want to make sure that that was a hand clap and not a hand raise.
Yeah, it was a question I had.
Okay, go ahead.
To address Melissa's question, and Tom, maybe you confirm this, the actual application of the new definition, the new out in the field would probably occur through program guidance that the DNR, that the Corps of Engineers districts would establish for the specific geographic area that they cover. Do you concur with that, Tom?
Yeah, and I haven't seen that, so this is an early estimate.
Right,
All
and that guidance probably would take quite some time to develop, because the guidance that probably is now no longer in effect, it took several years to develop completely.
The only thing I would say about that is that in the past, the decisions have tried to have an ecological basis to them, or at least some justification in the underlying science, and this decision doesn't. So it's it's very simplistic. So the risk is very high that we're unfortunately assessing things the way it will be carried out, but it remains to be seen.
All right, the next person I see is Itzy.
I was thinking about the economics of this. Do you have any sense of whether wetland permits have changed or the ownership has changed over time, to kind of get an idea of how the economic impact of the change?
That's not something that I've done. I'm only left with kind of impressions that I have. So one thing to be said is the public benefits of the flood abatement function, for example. You know, those are things that can be assessed. That's not going to be done on a large scale, but at the local scale, you do have entities like the Green Seams program at MMSD, where they are actively looking at achieving flood control objectives by buying, restoring, and protecting wetlands. So that's an area that I would love to see people latch on to and try to dig into. I don't have a lot of information that I can distribute at this point.
And this is Michael Cain. We have talked to the National Association of Floodplain Managers, and are going to share this data with them. And the initial reaction I got from the person I talked to there shortly after the decision came down was this has a potential of having very significant impacts on future flooding around the country. So I think that, you know, obviously there are economic issues associated with that. Other economic issues I think are associated with this decision are, if you look at the Dakotas and the flyways around the country, this is going to have, I think, a dramatic impact on potentially dramatic impact on waterfowl and other wildlife, which has an economic impact, that spreads, throughout the flyways. I think those are issues and questions that hopefully somebody will be looking at going forward.
All right, does anyone else have any questions? Otherwise, while you formulate them, I know you touched on this a little bit, but what kind of help do you need with the mapping or anything else from UW system academics?
Well, I guess what we've done has taken advantage of the fact that there was this large, significant project and a large database developed, and the position we were in was that we could take this data set and do some fairly simple analysis and generate these estimates. But there's a whole treasure trove of data out there for someone that wants to take it to the next step. And that's partly what I was hoping to inspire some ideas about how to do that. And that North Branch example that I used is just one example of what can be done. But again, I think the connection with the floodplains is going to probably be the most fruitful one, but there's also connections with water quality projects in watersheds that have TMDLs, where you have to look at the benefits of restoring wetlands and protecting wetlands and what that can mean for meeting water quality objectives. The fish and wildlife, the fish and aquatic life connection, again, is one that could be very fruitfully explored. Basically, just to reiterate, we've got a data set that does a map level estimate of the public benefits of every wetland in Wisconsin. So that's something that I think has many potential uses in the future.
Does the mapping include reservation lands?
Yes. Yeah, so the sources were basically the Wisconsin Wetland Inventory, which has mapped the entire state several times over. We started mapping in the late 70s and kind of completed the state by 1980, but we've been constantly updating those maps. But the funding has always been weak, and so the update cycle has been behind what would be ideal. So the wetland inventory maps at a county by county basis. And so some counties have very recent maps and some counties have older maps. And then in terms of tribes and national forests and things like that, there have been some special projects that have been done that have done more intensified mapping efforts. So there's areas where the data is better than others and more up to date than in others. We've gotten much better at mapping wetlands from where we were in the late 70s. And that's why we have this mysterious increase of wetlands from 5.3 million acres to 6.4 million acres. It isn't that we've been gaining wetlands, it's just that we're better at seeing them. And now with the age of LiDAR, it's just incredible what you can map. But then these other ancillary data sets, this LLWW system is one that the state of Michigan, I know, has done a lot of mapping using that. We applied that classification to all the wetlands in Wisconsin. Minnesota may have a similar system. I haven't checked with them to see, but so there's once you actually get into digging into the data, of course, as you know, that's where the devil's in the details, and you find a lot of variation in what kind of data is available. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you both for joining us today. I'm going to turn it over to Melissa for a wrap up.
Oh, I still had a question.
Oh, okay, go ahead.
Maybe it can be a wrap up, but I was just wondering if anyone is doing wetlands related research, and if you could share with us for a few minutes about what angle you're pursuing. I thought maybe Steph, you were working on something. Am I wrong on that?
I'm working on a way to a paper with Mike Vandenberg on sort of ways that private governance might be able to address it. For example, lobbying loan lenders to incorporate terms for development that are more wetlands friendly, things like that. So that's kind of what I've been working on, but no scientific research or anything.
So your work though sounds like it might be useful to Itzy's question about the ownership and the economics of it.
Yeah.
So it might be interesting for you guys to connect about it, just to learn, a little bit more and see if there's an economic question. Okay.
Sorry, Melissa, can I say something?
Yes.
So what I was going to say is that I don't necessarily do wetlands research, but we take it from a different angle where we see a policy change in any environmental policy change. And then we say, what was the change? What was the economic impact before and after the policy change? So the kind of things we do are things like, now that we observe this policy change, did, for example, ownership rates change at a fast rate, or did the wetland permits numbers change because of the policy change? So that's kind of the angle we looked at, rather than starting from the wetlands side, but the policy aspect. So yeah, anyway.
Yeah, and it sounds like that might be really fruitful, according to Tom's nudging here, to look at how it relates to flooding and the public investment that MMSD and other entities are making in flood abatement, and the fact that they really can't use ratepayer money to purchase protections for all of these newly non-protected wetlands. I want to have a caveat around the non-protected statement. So Mike, I don't know if you want to say anything about Wisconsin's wetland program. Jim Wasley posted a question about my presentation. It is available, Jim, and we can circulate the video of my presentation on this. But I want to turn it over to Mike, who's our guest, to see if you have anything to say about our wetlands program.
I've been retired now for a while, and so Melissa, you may be more up to date on exactly where the wetlands program is. Historically, we were very aggressive, and we were able to protect all wetlands in Wisconsin. When there was an earlier U.S. Supreme Court decision that removed federal protection of isolated wetlands, we were able to get a statute through the Wisconsin legislature unanimously in both houses. And there were split houses at the time, one Republican and one Democratic, and signed by the governor that said anything that was declared non-federal is still covered under Wisconsin wetlands standards and laws. And so we had done pretty well. In 2017, there was a statute adopted which provided an opportunity for people to fill 1 acre in urban areas and up to 3 acres in agricultural areas for wetlands that had been exempted from the federal program. With the extension of exemptions here, my fear is that there is likely to be more applications for those sorts of wetland fills, and the Department of Natural Resources is currently understaffed. So I think there are concerns that there will be erosion, and it could be somewhat significant erosion of protection of wetlands in Wisconsin going forward. So Melissa, you can add to that, but that's my perspective.
Yeah, right now it's really unknown what the level of requests are going to look like, because they had essentially a moratorium for the first part of the year on processing anything. The Corps wasn't making any jurisdictional determinations to say this isn't a federally protected wetland. So that was a bottleneck in this. But now that the Corps has a rule in place to move forward, we'll start seeing these exemption requests most likely. In the first year that the exemption existed, there were like a little under 3 acres of wetlands permanently filled. But every year it has increased. The people have taken advantage of the exemptions. And so in 2022, there were 40 acres of wetland permanently filled using the exemptions. So we've been able to track the upward trajectory, and we assume it's going to jump quite a bit, but we don't know at this point.
And the other concern going forward is that if there's a change in administration in Wisconsin, one of the directions that often industry takes is to say that the state of Wisconsin can be no more stringent in protection than the feds. And so there might be a proposal for a change down the road, which would remove protections of Wisconsin wetlands and make it consistent with the federal law. And if the federal law is Sackett, that would mean that there'd be a very large deregulation. Well, hopefully that's not on the near horizon, but that's something that I think we all have to be concerned about. And so that's one of the reasons that I think that, it's critically important that we develop good information about what the potential impacts are, and that we work both on the state and national level to try to get this information forward so that people can really see what the water quality, flooding, and other impacts are of this Sackett decision, which really did abandon precedent and has no scientific or rational hydrologic basis. And I'm not sure I'll live long enough to see that change, but I hope I do.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on, and I hope you'll live long enough to see that change, and that it won't take very long too. So we'll wrap it up here. We have a video of this conversation, and we'll post it so you guys can share it with others if you'd like. And I know that there's some ideas probably bubbling about what kind of research people want to do. I just saw that Eric Booth posted in the chat before he left that he's thinking about integrating this into his research on water quality modeling. So consider this planting the seeds of this. And it is amazing and wonderful that we have you guys doing this kind of mapping. I've been asking around to colleagues around the country to find out where this is happening. The only other place I've heard of is Florida. There may be something in Georgia, but it's really a huge asset to us to be able to see the world in this way, for you to take this policy change and reveal it in images for us, because otherwise it's extremely hard to conceptualize what's going on. So I know I'm going to be thinking about this for a while and trying to figure out how to integrate it into our center's research.
And I guess I'd like to add that, we had attached, or you had attached, the Opportunities Now paper that we did with the NWPR rule. Our proposal, once we have these numbers final and we're sure that they're consistent with the Corps and EPA interpretation, is that we will develop a new Opportunities Now document that we will make available for the public. We would appreciate any critique or critical review that you folks have of the work that we're doing, so that when we put that paper together, which hopefully be sometime in the next 6 to 8 months, that we're sure that we're on firm ground. So we really appreciate you participating today and look forward to potentially working with you going forward.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.